In Holmes County, Mississippi, a 76-year-old farmer named Walter Williams is pronounced dead. A funeral home prepares his body. He's placed inside a body bag, ready for embalming. The next day, an employee at the funeral home notices something impossible. The body bag is moving. Walter Williams is kicking it from the inside. He is rushed to a hospital. He survives. He lives for 2 more weeks after being declared dead. Genuinely, clinically dead, before he actually passes away from natural causes. This isn't a story passed down through rumor or internet legend. This is a real, documented medical case from 2014, and it isn't even unique. It has a name, Lazarus Syndrome, and it has happened in various documented forms, more times than most people would ever guess. Picture a hospital resuscitation room moments after a cardiac arrest. A medical team performs CPR for several minutes, monitoring a flat line on the heart monitor the entire time. Eventually, following established protocol, they stop. Time of death is called. The room falls quiet, and then, sometimes minutes later, with absolutely no intervention from anyone in the room, the monitor beeps again. A heartbeat, spontaneously returning, in a body the medical team had already determined was gone. Lazarus Syndrome, named after the biblical figure raised from the dead, describes this exact, real, documented phenomenon. The spontaneous return of circulation after resuscitation efforts have been stopped and death has been formally declared. Doctors determine death using a specific set of checks: no pulse, no breathing, fixed and dilated pupils, no response to stimulation. By every one of these standard measures, patients who later experience Lazarus Syndrome were, at the moment of declaration, genuinely indistinguishable from someone who had died. The heart wasn't beating. There was no detectable circulation. And then, against every expectation built into modern resuscitation medicine, it started again on its own. What's particularly striking is how consistent these checks are across hospitals worldwide, and how rarely they're ever wrong. Lazarus Syndrome isn't evidence that doctors are routinely making mistakes in determining death. It's evidence that, in an extremely small number of cases, the human body itself defies the very biological assumptions those checks are built on, restarting a process that every clinical indicator confirmed had genuinely stopped. A close, still shot of a heart monitor screen, a flat green line stretching steadily across the display. The room around it is silent, equipment powered down, a clipboard already noting the time. Then, almost imperceptibly, the line twitches, once, then again. Medical researchers have proposed several explanations for why this happens, though no single theory fully accounts for every documented case. One leading theory involves something called auto-PEEP, or dynamic hyperinflation, a buildup of pressure in the chest during CPR that can suppress circulation, masking a heartbeat that's actually still present beneath the surface. Once CPR stops and that pressure releases, blood flow may resume, the heart suddenly able to pump effectively again. Other researchers point to delayed drug effects, medications administered during resuscitation that simply take longer to act than the time medical teams allotted before declaring death, meaning the patient's body was already responding to treatment, just not quickly enough for anyone to detect it in the moment. A third theory focuses on the heart's own electrical system. During cardiac arrest, the heart's natural pacemaker cells can sometimes remain in a kind of suspended, unstable state, rather than completely ceasing activity. Under the right combination of circumstances, residual chemical changes in the blood, a slight shift in oxygen levels, even simple repositioning of the body during transport, these dormant cells may spontaneously fire again, restarting a rhythm that medical equipment had already confirmed as absent. One of the most striking documented cases unfolded in Russia, where a man, declared dead after an apparent alcohol-related medical episode, was transported to a morgue refrigeration unit. Hours later, a guard heard tapping and noises coming from inside. He found the man, naked, alive, and asking with almost surreal calm for a blanket. After being examined by doctors and confirmed stable, he reportedly returned directly to the pub he'd been at earlier that evening. Another documented case described a Russian grandmother named Lyudmila Steblitskaya, hospitalized for health complications and pronounced dead on a Friday night. Her body was placed in morgue refrigeration, scheduled to remain there until a Monday morning funeral. When her daughter arrived that Monday to collect her body, hospital staff discovered she was alive, having survived an entire weekend inside refrigerated storage. Her skin had been damaged by the extreme cold. She described only a vague memory of profound, bone-deep cold throughout the ordeal, a dim hospital corridor, A gurney parked outside, closed double doors marked simply mortuary. Somewhere beyond those doors, on this particular night, in this particular documented case, something that should have been final wasn't. Perhaps the most heartbreaking documented case occurred in Argentina, where a premature infant was declared dead just 20 minutes after birth. 12 hours later, in a refrigerated coffin, her parents arrived to hold her one final time before burial. As her mother lifted her, the baby let out a small cry. Doctors, initially assuming the parents were imagining it out of grief, confirmed moments later that the child was, in fact, alive. Her parents named her Luz Milagros, meaning miracle light. She lived for several months afterward, before ultimately passing away from unrelated health complications. A separate documented case in Spain described a prison inmate examined and declared dead by 3 separate forensic doctors after being found unresponsive in his cell. His body was sent for autopsy preparation, where staff began marking his skin in advance of the procedure, only to discover signs of continued life partway through that preparation process. The case prompted a formal review of how death determinations were being conducted within that particular prison medical system, given how close the autopsy had come to proceeding regardless. What makes Lazarus Syndrome so unsettling to the medical community isn't simply that it happens, it's that there's currently no reliable way to predict which patients it will happen to, or precisely when. Current resuscitation guidelines in many hospitals now recommend observing a patient for a brief waiting period after stopping CPR, specifically to monitor for exactly this kind of delayed, spontaneous return of circulation, before formally proceeding with death certification. This recommendation didn't emerge from theory alone. It came directly from accumulating case reports like Walter Williams's, each one forcing hospitals and emergency medicine associations to reconsider exactly how much time should pass and how many checks should be performed before a declaration of death can be considered truly final. Some hospitals have extended that observation window specifically in response to published Lazarus Syndrome literature, treating every prior case as a lesson the entire system needed to learn from. For the small number of documented patients and families who've experienced this phenomenon directly, the psychological aftermath is profound and complicated in ways grief alone never prepares anyone for. Family members have described the surreal whiplash of receiving devastating news, beginning to process loss, and then being told, sometimes only hours later, that the person they'd just begun mourning was alive after all. Some families have described a strange, lingering anxiety long after the medical crisis resolved. A fear that death itself, even once confirmed by every available test, could somehow still be reversible, then irreversible again, without warning. Grief counselors who've worked with these families note that the experience can complicate ordinary mourning processes for years afterward, since the emotional script for loss simply doesn't account for a death that briefly and genuinely undid itself. It forces an uncomfortable question that medicine still hasn't fully answered. If a body can restart on its own after every standard measure confirms it has stopped, how confidently can anyone really say, in any given moment, exactly where the line between alive and dead actually sits? This has been a real, documented medical phenomenon. Every detail in this video is sourced from confirmed published case reports and peer-reviewed clinical literature. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. Subscribe. Your body is stranger than you think. Somewhere, in a hospital right now, a heart monitor has just gone flat. No one in that room can say, with absolute certainty, that it's finished.